Welcome to the Backyard Bouquet Podcast, where stories bloom from local flower fields and home gardens. I'm your host, Jennifer Galizia of the Flowering Farmhouse. I'm a backyard gardener turned flower farmer located in Hood River, Oregon. Join us for heartfelt journeys shared by flower farmers and backyard gardeners. Each episode is like a vibrant garden, cultivating wisdom and joy through flowers. From growing your own backyard garden to supporting your local flower farmer, the Backyard Bouquet is your fertile ground for heartwarming tales and expert cut flower growing advice. All right, flower friends, grab your gardening gloves, garden snips, or your favorite vase because it's time to let your backyard bloom. Hi, flower friends, and welcome back to the Backyard Bouquet Podcast. Today's episode is such a special one because I'm joined by someone who's been an incredible champion for local flowers and sustainable floriculture. That's Debra Prinzing. You may know her as the founder of the Slow Flowers movement, a writer, a speaker, and a passionate advocate for flower farmers across the country. Today, we're celebrating the release of her newest book, The Flower Farmers, Inspiration and Advice from Expert Growers, which she co-authored with Robin Ovney. The book is a beautiful tribute to the heart and hustle of flower farmers and a deep well of wisdom for anyone who dreams of growing beauty from the ground up. In this conversation, we're going to dive into the meaning behind the Slow Flowers movement, how it's evolved over time, and why it matters more now than ever before. We'll also talk about the stories and themes that have emerged while writing this book and what Deborah's learned from the many growers she's met along the way. So whether you're a budding flower farmer, a backyard gardener, or someone who simply believes in the power of flowers, this episode is for you. Let's dig in. Hi, Deborah. Thanks for joining us today.
Hi, Jennifer. It's so nice to be with you. Thanks for inviting me.
Absolutely. It's so fun to get to talk with a fellow podcaster because you also host the Slow Flowers podcast, among the many other things that you do. And now, well, not now because you already were a published author, but now you have another title to add to your list.
That's right. It's really exciting to talk about, and thanks for the invitation.
Absolutely. It's an honor to have you here with us today. Let's start by going back to the roots. You are a recognizable voice in the local flowers movement. So can you tell us, what does slow flowers mean to you?
Oh, thank you so much for asking. I feel like it's kind of a catchphrase that has become universal worldwide, using the word slow flowers or phrase to describe what I care about. And I think a lot of people associate the adjective slow as, local and seasonal and sustainable. You can put it in front of many consumer categories, but it all kind of began to be in my vernacular when I worked on a book called The Mile Bouquet, which came out in 2012. And I was trying to explain to people this book is a documentary style book about the renaissance of American domestic agriculture, like this sort of resurgence of people growing flowers and wanting to know the farmer. And I was trying to shorten the description. So I said to people, it's like slow food, but just replace it with slow flowers. And people, especially in foodie cultures and communities, not just coastal, but all over the country. If you were in the culinary world, you're like, yeah, I got it. But it took a while to, for that to catch on. My husband and kids at one point were like, does that mean your flowers grow slowly? And yes, of course they do. But it's really just a reference to what we now say, which is our mission, which is as a society, is to inspire the floral industry and its consumers to embrace local, seasonal, and sustainable flowers. As advocates, that's what we really try to share with people and encourage people.
I love that. Thank you. For those listening that are not familiar with the slow foods movement, can you help explain that so people understand that as well?
Yes, absolutely. So Slow Food, as an organization, it started, I think, 50 years ago out of Italy. And really at the time, the Slow Food, I think it's called Slow Food International right now. They that was a response to, in a way, anti-fast food. That was, the story, you could look it up online. It's really like, we don't want McDonald's in our charming little Italian villages when we've got this wonderful grandma making beautiful, handmade pasta and making, harvesting herbs and vegetables from, her backyard and feeding our community. And so that, of course, is a very simplified version, but slow food has taken over in the culinary world. In the US, I think a lot of us look at Alice Waters of Chez Panisse in Berkeley, the famous restaurant. Started, I think, 45 years ago. She opened that restaurant, and that she really championed sourcing her food ingredients for her kitchen and her chefs from farmers in the Northern California, and then pioneering this approach to putting the farmer at the forefront, like listing the ingredients and who grew that ingredient on the menu. And we really advocate for that. We love it when florists do the same thing and say, your flower came from this farmer, and let me tell you about this farmer, and they're in my community, and they grow sustainably, and this is their unique approach to flower farming. So that's the parallel. And we don't eat our flowers usually, but we do care that they're grown sustainably for the planet and for the people who have to handle them.
Thank you for that clarification. So, this all started when you wrote the book, The 50 Mile Bouquet. Was there a moment that you just knew that this message needed to be shared with the world?
Yes. Jennifer, my background is journalism. I was a longtime home and garden writer for magazines and newspapers. And I feel like as a journalist, you're constantly trained to have this sixth sense about, it's almost like a physical, visceral reaction I have when I come across a topic, something that needs to have a story. I feel that the story needs to be told, and I do have a physical reaction to it. And I'm like, that is something that I can really tell a story and make an impact for the reader and for the person I'm interviewing. And so that has happened to me a couple times. I'm usually ahead of the market. Good news, bad news. I wrote a garden shed book in 2008, a decade before the she shed thing happened. Like, I'm like, okay, I really have a sixth sense about this. And I think what happened was in around 2010, even earlier, I was writing stories about flower gardening and architecture and interior design and landscape design up and down the West Coast. My main publications were like Better Homes and Gardens and Los Angeles Times. And I just found that my editors really responded to stories about flower farmers, and their readers really responded to stories about flower farmers. And I realized, wow, there's a story here that's kind of like a David and Goliath story, that this little industry is trying to come back after lots of setbacks and really bring local flowers into this massive global floral industry. And it's such a great privilege to tell those stories journalistically. So many, newspaper and magazine articles under my belt, I wanted to work on this book, and I partnered with David Perry, a Seattle-based photographer, who is also kind of as obsessed about the stories as I was. And we had a hard time selling that book, The 50 Mile Bouquet. And eventually, a small publisher based in Pittsburgh, St. Lynn's Press, which specialized in organic themed topics, lifestyle and gardens and cooking, they picked it up, and that's how it came to be. But there was some visceral reactions when I realized no one was telling the stories of these flower farmers, and I wanted to be the person to do it.
It's such a great thing that you started. What do you think it is about these stories that draws people in?
Well, that's a really good question. I mean, I kind of live in a bubble, and you might feel like this too. Like, we're so close to it. And this is sort of was the aha moment for me, because I am an avid gardener. I've gardened my whole adult life. I've never used a single chemical on my garden. And, it never occurred to me to do that. And so I just thought everybody knew where their flowers came from, and everybody knew you could grow these flowers. And they weren't coming from the cellophane wrapped sleeve at the grocery store. They were coming from a garden. And I think what happened when I realized that 80% of the cut flowers sold in the US were being imported, it confused me. I was just mostly bothered by the fact that it didn't have to be that way. It was such a waste of resources. And when I knew that most of the cut flowers I loved could be grown in the US, even if I didn't grow them, my neighbor grew them, or the farmer at my farmer's market grew them. So I think that is when I realized, um, well, just that it was an enormous challenge, and I wanted to help, you know, move the needle a little bit and change how people perceive their local flowers, versus just something that appeared miraculously. And just as an aside, anybody who has children and wants to garden with their children understands the privilege it is to help a child grow a tiny seed into a vegetable that they can eat. And that's why I had a vegetable garden when my boys were young. I didn't particularly love food farming or food gardening, but I wanted them to know that their the things they could eat didn't come in a shrink wrapped package at the grocery store, that they could pluck a carrot or a radish out of the ground that they planted themselves. And there's something, when you talk about why people respond, I just think that's something so, it's almost spiritual. It's so unique in our lives that we can watch the whole life cycle of a plant, and have a role in it, to connect us with nature.
Oh, you're speaking to my heart. And I have to say that we're so connected to it now that sometimes I have to pause and step back because, I mean, for me, I didn't have that aha moment. I was a wedding photographer, and I forget if it was 2014 or 2015. I was photographing a wedding, and I was a gardener, and I grew all the flowers that I didn't grow for this wedding, but this bride said to me, she said, "Hey, Jen, this bouquet I want you to photograph more than you might normally do because I grew all these flowers in my garden." And as I was taking those pictures, I'm like, I grew all of these myself. And it was that aha moment that, like, well, where do these flowers come from? Like, I had been photographing weddings for years and I'd never even considered, well, they just
Right.
always come from a big imported place, of course, but no, they could come. And so it was when I talked to my florist and she said, what do you do with all these flowers you grow? That it led me down this rabbit hole that has now led me into flower farming. But I still find myself asking people, where do you get your flowers? Oh, I go to Trader Joe's, I go to the grocery store. And I said, well, do you know where those flowers come from? And they don't even think about that connection. I mean, we're so trained to think about food, especially right now with Kiss the Ground and Common Ground. People are already thinking, okay, where does my food come from? How do I support that farmer? But it's that same concept with flowers. And I
Uh,
think
yeah.
that storytelling you're doing is so important.
Yeah, and it's interesting because even I do think that more people do know where their flowers come from or are asking. In this 15-year arc of my, kind of my own rabbit hole that I dove down and, was influenced to change sort of the subject matter of my writing, I do feel like I find myself having to explain less often.
Mhm.
It still happens, but I do think there's more awareness now. Thank goodness, but we have a long way to go.
We do have a long ways to go. So you just said 15 years you've been working on this mission. I imagine that this journey has changed a lot. Do you feel like there's been shifts and turns, that it's been a straight line as you've been sharing this mission of slow flowers?
Well, I love that question because, first of all, as I described, the slow flowers just wasn't like a business plan or anything. It was just this phrase that I started using as shorthand to describe the subject matter that I was writing about. And what happened after the 50 Mile Bouquet book is, I was working on the subsequent book is called Slow Flowers, and it was published in 2013. And I was by my effort for that book was to prove a point to an editor in New York City who I had previously done a very high profile book for, but she was not interested in publishing the 50 Mile Bouquet. And she said to me, "This is so fringe, Deborah. If you live in Santa Barbara, you can have flowers year round, but that is not relevant to most people around the country. And, the convenience store in my neighborhood in the Upper West Side of New York doesn't have local flowers, so clearly it's not common." And I was so frustrated. I just thought, I'll show you. And sometimes you have to have disbelievers to force you to figure out how you're communicating better. And I started a project to create a bouquet every week, a centerpiece or an arrangement um, from my own garden year round. I live in Seattle, Washington. So zone, 8A, 8B, something, I think at the time it was 8A. Make an arrangement, photograph it. And I thought it was going to be a blog project. It was going to be 52 weeks of local flowers. And my publisher, Paula Kelly, said 52 weeks of local flowers sounds like a 1980s self-help book. You've got to get a better title. And I said, well, I don't know. We're using this term slow flowers. What do you think of that? And he's like, bingo, that is a book title. That is the title of a movement. And he's really the one who pushed me to do it. Thank you, Paul. But Jennifer, I truly thought at the time that the hook that would inspire consumers, readers, people in the gardening community. I mean, again, I'm still in the gardening community. I wasn't really in the floral industry. I really thought that the key benefit, the key selling point was organic. I thought that's what would really blow up this industry. In fact, the subtitle of the 50 Mile Bouquet is the Organic Flower Growing, Gathering, and Design Guide, because we talked about organic practices throughout the book. But in the end, organic is not the top reason given for buying local flowers. It is really the top reason is the local connection and people realizing that they care about keeping jobs in their community. They care about supporting local floral agriculture. They care about the transportation footprint. And all of this came out of research from Kirsten DeWest, who is a marketing industry expert in sustainable topics. She owned an ad agency in Vancouver, BC, and really, she was my first guest on the Slow Flowers podcast back in 2013.
Oh, wow.
And she talked about her research where on this hierarchy of consumer values, organic was, and this was just for all consumer products, but if it was organic, had organic ingredients or whatever, it was like number 10 or 11, whereas local and seasonal and sustainable were all very top of mind. And it really changed my thinking that it's so good to have that insight, because organic is wonderful. We all love it, but there's so many barriers to for a flower farmer like you to go get certified, USDA certified. It's just complicated. It's expensive. It's not really designed for flower farming. It's designed for food farming. So it was a great insight, and I was humbled to realize that I had a lot to learn. But I, luckily had people who gave me input on that.
Thank you for sharing that. I love how much intention there is behind the slow flowers movement. I'm curious, how do you keep the message resonant with the world that's moving so fast?
Oh, wow.
It's a big one.
In some ways, we live in this macro world where we see this top level view of things, and it can be really disheartening. It's really disheartening to see stuff on social media where, there's a, massive installation of dyed carnations that are purple or blue, and they're put in floral foam, and some celebrity has spent hundreds of thousands of dollars to create this installation for an event or a proposal or, something. And you're like, where is the disconnect? That's really discouraging. So I think when you have that macro view and you're just going, oh my gosh, what kind of impact can we make as individuals? And really that's kind of what's going on in the world right now, is trying to make room for more individual voices, because that's how we get to understand each other. And, in this very difficult political environment, I think human conversations and human connections are probably the only way we're going to get out of this mess we're in. And, in the flower world, I feel it's the same way. And that's why I really love the opportunity, and you're doing this too, is to put one person and their story out into the world, for others to be inspired by or to learn from, because everybody's, in a way, there's something relatable about the human experience. And I'll talk about that when we talk about the Flower Farmers book, because I really had some amazing lessons about people speaking their truth. And that's the only way I think we're going to find this this sense of purpose and this forward thrust that we are on the right path. We are unapologetically promoting domestic flowers. We're not anti anything. We're pro local flowers, and that's all I can focus on.
I love that so much. I recently heard, I believe it was Mel Robbins was talking on her podcast, and I'd have to go back to the source, but I'm pretty sure it came from her. It sounds like something she would say. And it said the opposite of depression is purpose. It's not happiness, it's purpose. And I think that's what Local Flowers does is they have a purpose, they give you a purpose, and they have a purpose in their community. And I think what you just said was spot on and so beautiful. So thank you, which
Yeah,
is
thanks for that
perfect.
reminder.
Yes. Well, that leads us perfectly into talking about your new book, The Flower Farmers. So if we can, let's talk about this book that you've co-authored with Robin Ovney. Did I say her name correctly?
Yes, you did. Yeah.
Perfect. What inspired this project?
Well, this was a wonderful project that kind of fell in our laps. Robin is my business partner in the in the imprint called Bloom Imprint, and
Okay.
we are longtime journalism colleagues. Back when I was a business reporter at Puget Sound Business Journal in Seattle, Robin was the art director at the Seattle Times, and she's worked at Pulitzer Prize-winning newspapers for her whole career. But she's a photo editor. That's why you need to meet her, Jennifer.
Oh,
Her special power, her superpower is curating and editing and art directing. She is a journalist. She writes, as well. She has a master's in journalism, but her storytelling is visual. My storytelling is verbal. So we have a really great combination of putting things together. And we've worked together for years. Back in in 2010, Robin started this, again, ahead of its time, women's blogging group called Real Women, Real Life, and with like 12 subject matter experts. And we were writing white papers and marketing to companies that have women consumers. And, so I loved working with her. We had a wonderful experience over the course of, 3 to 4 years producing books by and about Slow Flowers members. And right when we weren't even expecting it, Abrams' publisher or editor-in-chief, Shauna Mullen, was talking to us about another one of our projects. And then she said, I'm not really interested in that, but I really want someone to do a book about flower farmers. Would you be interested? And we were so intrigued with her idea. So she gets the credit for it. She wanted this beautiful coffee table book, visually, like, honestly, Jennifer, it's like flower farm porn. It's like visually beautiful images jumping off the page to bring you into the life of a flower farmer. And so Robin and I said, yes, I'll do it, but only if Robin can do it with me. So that's how it happened. We've spent about 2 years working on it. And the approach is, well, we divided the book up geographically across North America. So regional kind of sections. And we tried to be as geographically diverse as possible. We have 29 flower farmers in the book. Obviously, there's thousands of other flower farmers we should have included in the book, but this is just how it worked out because it's over 300 pages. So
wow.
we, for each chapter, there's probably 8 to 12 pages of beautiful images of the flower farmer, their portrait, farm portraits, flower portraits, and their story. And so for each of the farms, what is kind of the service component, the giveaway for the reader is we have a 2-page spread that focuses on their signature flower. And that is, all the botanical information, but also their favorite varieties, a little bit of history of that flower, and then how they grow it, and how they harvest it, and some seasonal things like how to water it, and any particular giveaways like tips that the pro would do. And the reason I like that so much is we're not teaching people how to be flower farmers. You can't do that in a beautiful coffee table book, but you can give some information that the reader, who's probably a home gardener or a flower lover, had never thought about growing this before in their life. And they really want to, it's like a shortcut. Like, let me just get the top 10, dahlia varieties that Misty Vanderweel at All Dahlia Up in Palmer, Alaska says are diehards and beautiful producers and gorgeous colors, and that will kind of give someone a shortcut to growing dahlias in their garden.
Oh, I love that. Now, you mentioned there's 29 growers in this book. There's got to be thousands of local flower farmers in the United States alone now. Was there any guiding intention behind who you chose to highlight in this book?
There was a lot of guiding intention, and some of it was completely boiled down to great photography, to be perfectly honest. And this is why I always encourage people who want to market themselves to invest in good photography, because
Mhm.
uh, we worked with over 60 photographers in this
Wow.
book, and we had to use a lot of existing photography because of the short timeline. And to be honest, the photo budget wasn't huge. So we had to work with flower farmers who had their own photography to share. We did commission a photography as well. In fact, the photo on the cover was a beautiful shot taken by our friend Mary Grace Long, who is the Seattle-based photographer. We didn't know it was going to be the cover, but we had asked her to go shoot a Jello Mold Farm, which is in Skagit Valley, and she got the most gorgeous photo of a flower farmer holding a little cluster of hellebores that turned out to be the cover shot, which was wonderful. We also, frankly, Jennifer, I said to Robin, I only want to feature Slow Flowers members in this book. If I'm going to do all this work for
Mhm.
2 years and write about flower farmers, then I really want to underscore the fact that there are people committed to the Slow Flowers movement who we can give back to the community by telling their story. We also really focused on geographic diversity and also different types of diversity, both your family heritage, but also where you are in the arc of farming. Are you a first generation farmer? Are you with a multi-generational family farm that has been around for over 30 years? Um, are you borrowing land? Do you own your land? All the variables that you and I know people are up against, because we wanted
Mhm.
to try to find a point of reference and relatability for the reader. And as I said, geographic was important because we wanted to pick places that maybe were difficult to grow flowers in, like Comer, Georgia, where Three Porch Farm is, or Las Cruces, New Mexico, where Calhoun Flower Farm is, or up in Panton, Vermont, where Diddlin's Inn is, like where not just flower farming isn't just easy. People have their own geographic challenges and climatic challenges.
Yes. Well, there's so many flower growers in the Pacific Northwest. It would be easy because it's such an easy growing region to just specialize in that. Or focus on that. So I love that you did have a lot of intention in who you chose. And I've looked at your list of who's included, and it's a great representation of the
Well,
local
and yeah,
industry.
and to be honest, there are more Northwest flower farmers in this book than anywhere else. We actually had to divide the West into Northwest and West for that reason. But hey, that's where we're based, and that's where a lot of our relationships are.
Absolutely. It makes sense. Did you notice as you were writing this book, were there any shared themes such as hopes or struggles or lessons that emerged across the different regions and farmers?
Yes, yes, absolutely, all of the above, Jennifer. And I know that you've encountered this in your conversations with people. It seems, in a way, it seems very trite to say, that flowers gave me purpose or flowers healed me, but that is in a way the thread that connects all these stories. And I was really committed to letting people share that story of flowers helping someone survive cancer, get over the grief of a death of a child, recover from an addiction, um, you know, change their lives during a difficult career, leaving a corporate career and trying to find flowers. Because at one point we had an editor who's like, "Oh, these are negative themes, and we should not include them." And I was just so determined that these stories had to be, it's not like the whole story, but it's a reference in the chapter that I think humanizes
Mhm.
flower farming, and it just drives home the message that anyone can farm. And Robin has a phrase which I love so much. We used it in our introduction, which is the dirt welcomes everyone.
Oh,
And that's what we were trying to show.
I love that. Well, I think it's such a human nature, or it's part of human nature, just these feelings and these experiences. I was reading this morning, I'm reading a book right now, and it was talking about you can't experience joy without suffering,
Mhm.
and you can't experience suffering without joy, and how they go hand in hand. And I think that's so much part of why flowers feel like there's so much healing in them, because they bring that joy. um, and there's
Yeah.
just so many mental health benefits. I mean, we could have a whole episode on that, but I love that those are some of the common themes that came out of it.
Yeah, I mean, I really do think that anyone who gardens would be nodding their head saying, "Yes, of course, that's how the garden feeds me." On the f on the flower farmer side, it is a grind, and it's a lot of work, as you know.
Mhm.
And so, even just taking the chance to pause and articulate these thoughts to authors of a book who want to elevate that, I think people felt very seen and kind of affirmed that they have a purpose that is beyond their own acre
Mhm.
of land. And I know that they get it from their customers, but we can't say it often enough. It's just really a privilege to know all these flower farmers. Some of them are more known in the design industry than in flower farming, but we focused on their expertise and the crops that they grew. And I think that's kind of nice to weave that into the book too.
Absolutely. It sounds like this book is much more than just a guide. It also sounds like a celebration of people and place. What is your hope for this book? What do you want readers to walk away with, whether they're gardeners or experienced growers?
Mm. Well, yes, you can be completely wowed and seduced by these photos of like the most vibrant, you know, peacock purple delphinium you've ever seen grown by Jamie Rogers in, Helena, Montana, which seems like a harsh place. Like that's that's the initial response. But once you've read these stories and feel like you know these flower farmers, you start looking at flowers I believe, in a different way. And no matter where you're based, you're going to be looking at the flowers at your local farmer's market or at a farm stand or in a flower shop and start being curious about, well, how did they get here and who grew them? And or maybe you meet the farmer at the local farmer's market, you want to hear their story. And what I'm seeing in the slow flowers movement more and more, and I know you've seen this too because you're working on it yourself, is bringing people into the farm and helping them have a little piece of that. They're
Mhm.
not going to be flower farmers, but they want to experience it. And that whole, floral agriculture, floral tourism, all of that is bigger than ever. And I think there's a reason for that because we're providing a portal into um, what humans need, which is connecting with nature.
Yes. And remembering that we're part of it. We're part of that nature is so powerful. It gives me goosebumps just talking to you right now about it. It's that beauty. Everyone's so hungry for that little bit of beauty, um, that I think it's
Yeah,
the
it's so
perfect.
true. And I just interviewed a slow flowers member who's a farmer florist who's starting to, or she shifted her whole business to do custom growing for couples who are getting married. And she's now created this day where all her couples in a given season are invited to her farm and they get to plant a little row of something. And I'm like, wow, are you putting them to work? She said, no, no, I'm not putting them to work. I'm letting them feel part of their own wedding flowers
Ooh,
by planting some seeds or plugs or tubers so that tactile experience of touching the soil might come back to them when you're pinning the boutonniere on the lapel or holding the bouquet, 6 or 12 months later. And it just was, it's a little bit of work on her part to do this, but the payoff is massive because who else is doing that in their community? That's something that people will not forget, and they will talk about it and share that story with their wedding guests. And I think that will have this rippling effect, which will be beneficial for all of us.
Oh, I love that. What a beautiful thing she's doing. That's such a great story. I was just going to ask you if there was any particular stories from the book that have lingered with you.
Oh my goodness, there's so many. Give me a second.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because
Sorry, I'm
that is
putting you on the spot. I should
no,
have
no,
given you
no,
this
no.
beforehand.
That is not, that particular story is not in the book. But you know, I think the one that I want to focus on the most is the cover photo, the hellebore and Diane Sukhavati and Dennis Westfall, who you know, Diane.
Yes.
They founded Jello Mold Farm in Skagit Valley. I mentioned them earlier. They also were co-founders of the Seattle Wholesale Growers Market. Diane was on the cover of the 50 Mile Bouquet. So I've been like her documentarian all these years since I first met her 15 years ago. But what I find so inspiring about Diane and Dennis is, they're kind of in the last active chapter of farming on their farm, and they're looking to the future. They don't have children, but they know they have a legacy, and their legacy is teaching other flower farmers and creating opportunities for younger and newer farmers to come apprentice for them, or be part of some event or workshop on their farm, and just paying it forward, I guess, is the best way of putting it. And the fact that they are farming and they're still active and engaged and excited about helping other people farm, they're not looking at any of this as competition. They're not worried that someone's going to take away their little piece of the pie. They're trying to make the pie bigger. And the role model there is not just them. There's so many other farmers that are doing something similar in the book, but I just bring them up. I call them futurists. And I feel like, they are willing to change their business model to to make it fit their lifestyle and allow them to do more community development and community support. So that's really inspiring, and I'm really glad that I included them in the book, because that's super personal, and I've been able to witness that. Whereas some of the farmers in the book I've only met once or twice. I had to do lots of Zoom interviews. I didn't necessarily get to go interview them in person for their chapter, but um, it still makes for great storytelling. So it's a privilege if I get to be on the farm. If I don't, then I have to do it virtually. I'm still completely committed to that story and that flower farm.
I love that that's such a full circle moment that Diane was on your cover of your first book, and here she is on this one now. And I've interviewed her. She'll be on the podcast as well at some date this spring or early summer. And it was a lovely conversation. And I think that what you said about not it's the community over competition. When we
Mhm.
remember that 80% of US flowers are imported, we're not competing with one another. There's plenty of room for us to expand. And so I think that's such a great, great story right there.
I couldn't agree with you more. That's a great statement too.
I'm curious, in interviewing all of these farmers for this book, did any of them cause you to shift perspectives or think about how you source flowers differently?
Oh, that's a good question. Um,
Or maybe it reaffirmed?
well, I think what I took away from this, and in figuring out these focal flowers or the featured flower chapters,
Mhm.
it was kind of comical because Robin and I had to kill a lot of darlings, because everybody, not everybody, but a huge percentage of these farmers were like, "Oh, I really want roses. I really want peonies. I really want dahlias." Well, it turns out we can only do one, right? And so we had to kind of say, "Well, what's your second choice? What's your third choice?"
Uh-huh.
And some of the creativity that came out of that was, okay, this may not be their major crop, but it's something that they have expertise in. And it's up to the farmer to seduce the customer, the florist, or flower lover, to seduce them with the story of that flower. Because maybe it's not familiar. It's not something we've seen in a flower shop before or seen at the grocery store. So we need to know that story. And the best example of that is Giulio Fritas of the Flower Hat. He's also in Montana, and he's in Bozeman. He's a very successful farmer florist, big on social media. You know, his presence is he's extra in every way possible. And he said immediately when we told him we wanted him to be in the book, he said, "I want to do Sanguisorba."
Oh,
And I'm like, Sanguisorba, I used to grow that once when I was involved in the Northwest Perennial Alliance back in the first decade of this century, but it's not a cut flower, you know, and I was really confused by it. And the common name is Burnett or Great Burnett. It's this funny little, like, deep wine-colored maroon kind of bunny tail on a thin stem, not particularly long stem, but Julio swears by this as like the secret sauce of every bridal bouquet he's ever made. It's like saved his hide when other, deliveries didn't come through or a crop failure. He loves this perennial, and I swear he's going to single-handedly repopularize it or bring it to attention of other farmers who've never thought about growing it. So that I love that. That really made me laugh. And I think the other one is Leon and Carol Carrier of Plant Masters, longtime farmers. I mean, they've been farming for over 30 years. Their son has now joined them, Leon Jr. They're in the Baltimore, Maryland area, and they make major bank every year on ilex, on winterberry, red,
mm,
and the red variety and the orange variety. And that's not an overnight crop where you're like, oh, I'll try this and sell it next year. The reason they're so successful is Leon planted his first, you know, row in 1990, and that's why he's making a great amount of revenue off of that now, and he can sell every stem. So I love those two examples. Like, people are constantly learning and they're constantly teaching themselves. And that came out in these stories too. Like, it's great to be grow the basics, right? Because we all need the basics. But what gets people excited and kind of geeking out is all these curiosities of
mhm.
like, oh, I have never tried that. And I think the home gardener wants to know that too. So, like, I might grow ilex, but I'm probably going to grow. I think you have to have a male and a female, so maybe I'll have to grow two. But Sanguisorba, that's easy for anyone to add to their garden, and if it can grow in Bozeman, Montana, it can grow where you are. So that was a fun takeaway, and kind of a, it feeds that what can I grow next kind of hunger that most gardeners have.
Yes. It's always hard. You want to keep adding more and more to your garden.
And there's
So
always room. And Jennifer, my theory is if my fist and my wrist can fit down into a section of the garden to dig a hole, then I got room for something else.
I love that. I'm going to be in trouble because I have 20 acres to fill then.
Right, right. I have a suburban backyard, so I'll just be that person who encourages you to grow more.
Yes, I'm trying to pace myself right now because I see all of this inspiration. I'm like, oh, I need to add this. No, I don't. I need to stay focused. We hired a farm consultant to help us get going on the farm. And she said, repeat after me. I need you to trust the process and stay the course right now. So I'm trying to make mental note of all of these wonderful additions to add to the farm down the road.
Well, I think that's really a good point. I'm glad you brought that up because we did also, have farmers telling us stories about their failures and about how they had to pivot, even though that word is overused, but how they took had to take a pause and let their land go fallow for a while just to rest and give them, take a season off. So, I mean, I think that those are not as pretty and not as flashy stories, but they're the truth.
Yes. I don't think people always realize how hard it is. It's not the dresses and twirling in the field that you see on Instagram that are the viral reels. It's the true labor of love that goes into flower farming. So, which is perfect because I wanted to next talk to you about the grit behind the beauty of flower farming. So, I was going
Yeah.
to ask you, what are some of the harder truths about flower farming that people might not realize that you've learned through interviewing all of these farmers?
It is a hard truth, and one that came out, especially interviewing families and couples, is that oftentimes the farm needs the outside income of a non-farm um, career or job, and that's what's impressed me the most is that people find if they're really committed, if this isn't just a hobby farm on the side, like a little, experiment, but if you're really committed, you do find a way. But there are people who walk away from it. So I don't want to disparage that either, but I do think that the stories that I'm gleaning most are to really be in love with this and keep yourself going. You have to do what's right for you, your family, and your farm. And you can have the grit if everything is in balance, but if everything's out of balance, that's when you burn out. And so
Mhm.
what I've found the most inspiring is people, and I see this increasingly, people giving themselves permission to farm the way they want to and the farm the way it works for their lifestyle. They might have children at home. They might have a home based farm where they live on the farm. And so they determine how they want to let the public have access to that. Um, they may go heavy into, farmer florist and retail floral shop kind of side of things, or they're 100% look, I just want to grow and I will find the channel to sell wholesale because that is how I have time for, my weekends off. I don't have to go do weddings and events. So whatever it is, I feel like there's more room now for what is a flower farmer. The definition isn't just this monolith; it's many different facets, and that's encouraging because I feel like I'm hearing that more and more. Like you do what's right for you. It doesn't mean your model is good or bad. It's just what's right for you. And I think that's the way you can deal with the exhaustion and the fatigue. And even at the end of the season, everyone's feeling it no matter what, no doubt. But it's it's just, I think, there's no one size fits all anymore. And that's encouraging. And I would encourage others to start asking yourself those questions. Just because you see something on Instagram or you take an online workshop that tells you how to do something one way, that is, again, back to one person's perspective and maybe not right for you. And the flower farmers featured in this book are doing all kinds of things that are truly personal. A lot of them are artists. A lot of them are really motivated by wellness and healing, or by hospitality, or by just creating a living for a family, and so they can have time to homeschool their children. Whatever it is, it there's enough of these models that someone can find their particular, interests or capabilities in some of these stories.
I think that's one of the things that's so beautiful about local flowers is that there are so many different avenues that you can sell your flowers and make a living off of it. Last year, I interviewed Katie from Hidden Springs Flowers on the podcast, and she said to me something that really struck is she said, "You don't make your life fit the farm, you make the farm fit your life." And
Amen. I agree with that completely.
it was
That's
such a
great.
great statement, especially for me, like as we're starting over from scratch. We have a bare piece of land that I was like, we get to literally choose and think with intention, what do we want this to look like so that it fits our life and aligns with what's important to us. And it's so fun because as I look out, I'm like, we have a local chat group we call the Gorge Flower Growers, and I think there's 25 people in it now. And we don't look at each other as competition. It's this community, and you start looking at what everyone does, and everyone has these unique little gifts and avenues, and there's still room for more people, which is hard to sometimes believe when we're in such a small community. But it's true that there's so many ways that you can be
Mhm.
a flower farmer and add beauty to your community and make it profitable as a living.
I admire you for saying that because I do think having the conversation with yourself about what it is you want is takes time, and maybe takes, giving yourself a little pause. And a society doesn't reward that. Society rewards just plowing forward and, um, you know, I guess putting the cart before the horse, and it's not always the right thing to do. Um, Mandy and Steve O'Shea, who own Three Porch Farm, and they're very successful flower growers, and they have a story that they share in the book about how they give themselves kind of like a self-imposed work retreat where they go sit, for a day or two and reflect on all the highs and lows of the past season before they commit to what they're doing the next season. That seems pretty basic, but how many people take the time to do that? And it's just great that they explained how they do that and why they do that and how it makes them better farmers and makes them a better couple, who are committed to each other and to their family business. So I took a lot of inspiration from that.
I love that. We did family vision boards this year because the farm is such a part of our entire family right now. And our goal is to someday live on the property. And so we all made vision boards that included the flowers and what does it look like to each of us. And it gave such clarity of where everyone's at also. So,
I love that clarity. Yep, I agree. I agree. And it can change, but for now, that's what it looks like.
yes, I love that you said things can change. I'd love to know, what advice would you offer to flower farmers or any creative who's navigating a season of the in between or questioning their path?
Mm, that's a great question. I mean, I've been there myself. I think we all want to have our unique brand and and be able to articulate what that is. And sometimes it is a little bit uncertain. I have a friend who's a creative, who's an artist and a writer, who said to me, it seems like every 6 or 7 years I do a major change. And often it is not self imposed, it's imposed by external forces, which is, can be scary. It could be, in her case, it could have been, health related or finances related. Um, a lot of people, have this wonderful career path that somehow gets knocked off by the economy or whatever. So I think, I don't know, what I go back to is I'm always able to write even when the work isn't there. I'm always able to post on my blog or, write for the Slow Flowers Journal. I'm always able to keep writing even if someone's not paying me to do that. Now some people say, well, that's foolish. But I do think there's something, that inner urge to create is something that all creatives understand,
Mhm.
even if you're not getting paid to do it. And I guess for flower farmers, it may be just distilling down what is essential, and maybe it isn't growing 100 crops. I think what we're seeing now in the industry are these genus specific experts coming out, with books on sweet peas and books on pansies, and you know who I'm talking about, like people who are really committing and they're all in on one specific point of expertise. And I think that's something that people could consider. It's a funny, as a writer, I thought years ago when I was a garden writer, working for the daily newspapers in Seattle, I thought, oh, I don't have an expertise. I don't have a subject matter that makes me an expert. Like I had a friend her expertise was, deer proof landscaping. Okay, well, that was her thing, and everybody knew it. And that's how she got those speaking gigs that you and I were talking about. So I truly, one time I thought, I'll be an expert on blue flowering plants. And I ordered like the 3 books out there in the marketplace that were very scientific and very boring about blue flowering plants. And I was like, when I got them and I thought I was going to do all this research and become an expert, and I couldn't get excited about it. And I just laughed at myself like, okay, you know what? Just stop and think about what gets you excited and what you love, and just start doing more of that, even if you're not getting paid for it. And I think that's really how I became, um, the payoff came when I became interested in writing about flower farming and sustainable floral design. I'd already proven that I was an accomplished journalist, and I had those skills, so I could just eventually pick up this subject matter that I was excited about and go deep into it. And I guess the corollary in flower farming is you already have expert growing skills, right? You can probably grow anything. Um, it's nice to grow what pays the bills, but always grow something that feeds your soul too. Even if it's just one small patch of sweet peas. You know, I think otherwise you lose sight of, what's this all about?
Absolutely. Yes, I've had so many guests on here that say, grow what brings you joy.
Mm,
So true,
yeah,
because when you are passionate about what you're doing, it's so much easier. Then it doesn't feel like a job anymore. It feels like something that you get to do. Like one of the things, I have a coach, and one of the things we always talk about is that mindset of, instead of I have to do something, but I get to do something.
yeah.
And so,
That's so funny you say that. I try to say, I'm going to go be in the garden rather than I have to go work in the garden, because I was finding that sort of a negative mindset.
mhm.
So it is a privilege to, even if you're weeding, it's a privilege to be touching plants and touching soil. And just to back up for a second, if you really want to be a flower farmer, you also have to grow what pays the bills. But
Yes,
that's just comes with experience, and that comes with knowing who your customer is and what they want. And that goes back to brand, and if you have those relationships in your community, hopefully you'll be, open to those lessons about, what is going to really, have amazing yield or super long growing season, or whatever it is that you can make bank off of while you're also growing what gives you joy.
absolutely. Or it's even better when you can combine the two together.
Yes, that's the secret to success. I agree.
So, oh my goodness, I could talk to you forever. And I still have so many more questions, but I'm going to pick and choose a few of my questions that I have written down to be respectful of your time and our
And
listeners.
I'll try to give you shorter answers.
No, this has been so amazing. We'll just have to continue even more another date. Um, if you could go back in time and talk to the earlier version of yourself that was just beginning your journey, what would you say to her?
Mm. I knew you were going to ask me that question, and I was thinking back to the times when I've chosen to go the direction that somebody else wanted me to go, to take, and not the thing that, decades later I'm like, I should have done that. Podcasting is one of them. I started my podcast 12 years ago, and it has been a pure joy, very successful, and it doesn't feel like work. Whereas the grind of writing, the journalistic grind that I spent decades in, always feels like work. I mean, even though I love storytelling, I love interviewing people, I love writing stories, it's still work. It's different than podcasting. And so I always joke that I should have gone into radio out of college instead of print journalism. But I didn't have a mentor who showed me that way. So I'm kind of laughing about that. Now I get to do it. But, that might have had a completely different path for me if I had gone into radio. Um, I think the other thing is, just at my decade in life, I'm 65. I just feel like, um, it's not too late for me to change and to say my younger self didn't have this permission, or my younger self didn't know this was an option, but now I can. I can take myself on a personal retreat and go travel by myself, even though when I was young that I wasn't encouraged to do that. So I think that that's maybe what I would say to my younger self is follow your curiosity, even if there's nobody who's showing you that that's an option.
I love that, listening to your inner self,
Mhm.
trusting that. That's so beautiful. What is one truth that you have learned from flowers that you carry with you, something beyond just the beauty of the flowers?
It's flowers are resilient, plants are resilient.
Mhm.
I always say this, like, we think that they have just, failed or they've died, and then inevitably there's I'm not saying this for every single plant, but in general, plants are resilient. And the example that I learned years ago was, we renovated a bungalow that we bought in Seattle that, was a 100-year-old bungalow, and all the plants around the foundation were dug up by the contractor. And lo and behold, the following season, this massive stand of Japanese anemones came up in that same spot where the foundation was. And I was like, wow,
Mm.
these plants, they want to grow. And they just waited for this construction to be over so they could come back and be the most beautiful stand, so mature, it would have taken me years to grow something like that. And so that I feel like I always think about those Japanese anemone and think plants are resilient. They come back. That's the best skill we can teach our children, to be resilient and bounce back from disappointment or failure. Um, yeah, I'm not quite sure how you teach it, but you have to model it. And uh, I guess you have to teach yourself. So sometimes I think that the garden does have those lessons. It's very easy for me to anthropomorphize every flower, and say he or she is telling me this, but I do think that there is some truth to that.
I couldn't agree more. I love what you just shared because we just finished clearing out, I don't even know how many dumpsters anymore of trash off this property that's been buried there for years. And my husband spent a weekend clearing out all of this styrofoam and garbage out of this creek. And I mean, it was buried so high. We had an excavator that was pulling some of it out.
Oh,
And
wow.
about a month ago, when we came back and it's all cleaned up, there was this whole hillside of daffodils that had been planted. And they're all old world varieties that I've been sharing on Instagram and asking people. I'm like, I don't even know what these varieties are. I've never seen anything like this. And people have helped me to identify the different varieties that are growing there. But I'm like, for probably 20 plus years, they've been buried under trash, but they knew what to do as soon as they were given a little bit of care and the space to bloom. And I mean, if that's not resilience, I don't know what
Oh,
is.
I love that story. Yeah, it's almost like that can be your your logo or your metaphor for what you're trying to do on this whole garden, this whole farm, is bring it back to life and give it
Yeah,
a life.
that's exactly what we're trying to do is that the land knows what to do. We just need to give it the space and the permission to do so.
I love that story. I can't wait to visit.
I'm so excited for you to visit. Well, I've got just a couple more questions and we'll wrap this up. Is there anything I haven't asked you today that you want to leave our listeners with?
Well, oh, thanks so much for asking that. If you're curious about what we're doing with the Slow Flowers movement, please just come visit us. Jennifer will have the links, I'm sure, but
Yes.
we are a community of 700 individual entrepreneurs, floral entrepreneurs who are committed to getting the word out and reflecting that value of seasonal, local, and sustainable in their own businesses. And you're welcome to participate and get involved. So I'd love to welcome anybody to check us out and reach out too.
Thank you. I will include links to that in the show notes. I also would love for you to share with the listeners today, where can they find your new book, The Flower Farmers?
Okay. The Flower Farmers is published by Abrams. It will publish on Tuesday, May 6th. So by the time you hear this, it will already be out. All independent booksellers, I'll give Jennifer a link that has our publisher, Abrams, has a link that has all the main book selling portals on one link. So you can, if you have a favorite, you can do that. Ask your independent bookseller to order it, ask your library to order it. It's I'm hoping it'll have a long shelf life, what they call evergreen stories in a book that will hopefully have a long life after I do.
Thank you. Well, I'm so excited to get my hands on a copy. I've gotten to see your PDF version and it's a beautiful book. So, thank you so much for joining us today to share about your mission, the Slow Flowers movement, and this book that you've poured your heart and soul into. It's been such a delight, and I'd love to leave the door open because I feel like we could continue this conversation on another future episode.
I would enjoy that, Jennifer. Thank you for being such a generous host. It's been a wonderful conversation. I really appreciate it.
It's been a delight. Thanks, Deborah. I'll chat with you again soon, I hope.
Bye bye.
Bye bye. Thank you, flower friends, for joining us on another episode of the Backyard Bouquet. I hope you've enjoyed the inspiring stories and valuable gardening insights we've shared today. Whether you're cultivating your own backyard blooms or supporting your local flower farmer, you're contributing to the local flower movement, and we're so happy to have you growing with us. If you'd like to stay connected and continue this blossoming journey with local flowers, don't forget to subscribe to the Backyard Bouquet podcast. I'd be so grateful if you would take a moment to leave us a review of this episode. And finally, please share this episode with your garden friends. Until next time,
Keep growing, keep blooming, and remember that every bouquet starts right here in the backyard.